Welcome to another episode of the Beyond the Device podcast, where we explore the life-defining moments that shape careers within the medical device industry. We are particularly interested in understanding how someone's personal experience, pivotal events, or challenging moments influence professional journeys. And as we progress through the conversation, we will eventually land on the question, what is the one defining moment that has changed everything for you and set you on the path that you're onto today? Today's guest is a regulatory leader who is just a couple of years short of nearly 3 decades of experience in medical device compliance strategy and leadership. He has an outstanding track record in global regulatory approvals, in particular for complex orthopedic, electromechanical and software-driven medical devices. Now, it's fair to say he's had an amazing career to date, but today's conversation's not about the titles or the achievements, it's about the person behind it all. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Jim Baker. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Nathan. Good to be here.
Welcome, Jim. So as with all of our podcasts, we go back to where your story began. So if you can just tell us a bit about your early years and what shaped you growing up.
Not my professional life, you mean? So I grew up in a Oxfordshire town called Banbury, in a quite a large village on the edge of Banbury. So my formative years were spent playing in the hay bales and paddling in the brook down in the countryside, and walking a dog. So that was my early years. After that, we moved to a village just outside Swindon. I must have been about 16, so that's where most of my friendships that I have today were formed, in and around Swindon. And indeed, I live in Swindon Old Town today.
Nice. And what were your aspirations as a child and teenager?
Well, up until I was about 11, I wanted to be a train driver.
Okay.
I think a lot of young boys are like that. I did have a train set, etc. After that, most of my decisions were based on wanting to become a GP. So I chose my GCSEs with that in mind and my A-levels with that in mind, but I never ended up being a GP.
Okay.
I changed my mind.
But it took you towards something within the medical industry. Was it a pivot at some point that took you more towards medical devices?
Well, the pivot to medical devices happened after about 5 or 6 years in pharmaceutical. But yeah, those decisions that I made based on being a GP took me down a very much sciencey route, physics, biology, chemistry, and mathematics. So I suppose that led me kind of naturally into something more medical focused. And my early career, I started working at a company that was doing freeze drying formulation for pharmaceuticals, and that was very interesting because I'm also quite technical. I love the technical stuff. And the freeze dryers were amazing, and the process around getting those like freeze-dried wafers I found very, very interesting. And I started off there in manufacturing, but took the jump to QA really like a lot of people by chance. It got put up on the internal notice board, and I thought, oh yeah, quite like the sound of that. And I'd spoken to a few of the QA lot. It was shift work, so in the deep of the night, you would talk to people about their role, etc. So that point is probably one of the pivot points. I went from manufacturing into being a QA officer, and I'd review batch documentation and provisionally release them to the customer. Obviously not release them to market, that was the QP's job, but we would check all the documentation and allow shipping to the customer on the basis that it will subsequently be released by QP or held by QP.
So before you got into industry and when you had ambitions of being a GP, were there any early role models or influences from school, through family? What exposure did you have that really set you on that path?
Yeah, so there was my chemistry teacher at school can I mention his name? Mr. Blinko. He's probably not even alive now. Yeah.
Yeah.
But he was a great influence. I did have a natural flair for chemistry. It was one of those things I didn't really have to work at. It just all came naturally. And he saw that. And yeah, we used to talk about chemistry after the lesson and before the lesson. And yeah, he was a great influence of mine, and definitely took me down that more sciencey route.
And what sort of age would that have been?
That would have been secondary school, so around 13, 14, that sort of age. And of course, then I chose GCSE chemistry, and yeah, got an A, of course, in my GCSE. So yeah, he was probably one of my most formative influences. I suppose apart from that as well, there was, and maybe not a lot of people would say this, but also my dad. My dad was an influence, and we'd often talk about sciencey things, and often I would be out underneath the car with him, repairing the car. We had an old Vauxhall Victor that was always breaking down, and I was always his mate, fixing the car with him, and that's actually very useful to me today. I mean, often today the cars are just, you open the bonnet and it's all black boxes, but some of my early cars, yep, I fixed them, and that's purely down to what I learned with my dad, and not just about specific things, just about problem solving, manufacturing a tool perhaps, and getting around a problem. And that's my dad. My dad taught me a lot of that, and not just in cars but in DIY as well. And it's all just about problem solving. You don't know everything, but you know how to go about trying to solve a problem, and that's my experience of do it yourself around the house. So I've done quite a lot. I'm sitting down here at the bottom of my garden in an office that I built. It's air conditioned and heated and etc. And that's just one example of what I've done. And a lot of this I owe to it is problem solving that my dad taught me.
And what is it that he done as a career?
Well, he was an engineer.
Okay.
He ended up selling crane hoists for a German company called DMAG. But actually, towards the end of his career, he went into care with my mum. My mum was a nurse, and together they worked at a foundation called the Leonard Cheshire Foundation, looking after disabled people, often from a military background, but I think they expanded it to non-military. And he was head of home, and my mum was head of care. And I think they kind of wanted to move on, so that's when they bought a rest home in this village I was talking about, Purton, just outside Swindon. So he was an engineer at heart, and I often say to people that in another life I would have been an engineer, because I do think that I exhibit those sorts of engineering. It's just all basically about solving problems.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I even though I say so myself, sometimes I've done some very imaginative solutions to things, often on a very tight budget. Early on in my career, where you don't have much money, so hence you're fixing the car yourself, and you're mending things and doing some of the home improvements yourself.
And what we tend to find is that you'll have an experience in your life. It could be like a pivotal event, a turning point, something happens, and maybe not necessarily at the time you realise how important it is, but looking back, you realise after the fact. Is there a moment in your early years, later on in your work life, a turning point that has kind of set you on the path that you're on to today?
Yes, I would say there were two, and one is very much career path, and one is very much professional character defining. So I'll start with the latter. Early on in my career, I was working at a pharmaceutical factory, and I won't mention the name. Those who know me will know where it was, but actually it had quite a toxic culture underlying everything there, or at least I found it to be. Maybe others didn't. And I was kind of swept away with that toxic culture, and maybe started to join in a bit. And there was one day that a production manager, a departmental manager, was showing around a new technical guy, process technical guy, and he compared him to I was with another colleague who was the technical guy for this department, and he said that this is the same person X, but down here in this department. And I still don't know why I said it, but I was disparaging about the person up in the other department, and the departmental manager quite rightly had me on it. He came back with a very much put down, to which I just retorted touche, but actually in my head I was thinking, why did I just do that? Why did I just join in that horrible culture? And that changed me, honestly, changed me for the rest of my career. And since then, it's always been about the people for me. And, you know, everybody brings their own thing, and most people are trying their hardest to do what they do and do it well. And, you know, you can support them in that. And so I look at people, just whatever they're doing, as equal to myself. You know, the cleaner in a department might be in his head thinking about deep philosophical arguments, and he might just be happy doing that role, and that's what suits him. But that doesn't mean that I look down on him. You know, he might be doing a really good job, and similarly, other people who are maybe doing more senior roles. You know, and it just, that one moment shaped my career and how I handle people, and really I suppose it made me grow up in a sense.
And how old were you at that time?
Would have been probably early mid-20s, something like that. Can't remember the exact age. And the departmental manager was maybe a few years older than me, but I think he had a lot of empathy. And I think that he was, in his head, he was very wise. He was older than his years in wisdom. And I did actually learn other things from him about people as well. And you know what? Recently, I did reach out to him on LinkedIn, and I told him that he gave me a career-defining moment. I didn't say what it was, but I said that, you know, you were harsh but fair and made me grow up. And he came back and said, I hope I wasn't too harsh. I don't know if he remembered the incident or not. He might have done. I don't know. But yeah, I just felt the need to reach out and tell him, you know.
Yeah. And what was the impact of that on you personally? So you've said what you've said. The responses come.
When I went back to this person.
No, the original event where you've kind of said it. What was how were you feeling? What were the emotions? Tell us what was going on in your mind at that point.
The emotions, I mean, as you might imagine, once it was kind of highlighted what I'd done, it was guilt and shame. You know, it was almost why did I do that? I mean, I even respected and liked the guy who I had disparaged. You know, and like I say, it just made me always try to see the best in people and realise that, you know, everyone's just a human and they're all trying their best, and not to get sucked up in a toxic culture. And actually, if you're in a toxic culture, if you can just go, which is eventually what I did from this company. Yeah. Which might be on to my second career defining moment.
Yeah.
Because in that same company, you know, it continued over the years. I'd done various roles, QA and in manufacturing, and was working in a role where I was coordinating a couple of shifts in manufacturing. And it was a time of great change. There was a lot going on, a lot changing. And as you know yourself, probably people don't like change. And, you know, it was always a case of jibbying people along and, you know, bringing them up and saying, no, it's good. These changes are good. It will make things better. And then one day, a lady said to me, "It's rubbish here, isn't it, Jim?" She didn't actually use the word rubbish, but I can't say it on this podcast. And normally I would turn around and say, no, we're doing this and we're doing this, and, you know, this will change. It's all good. But I just turned to her and said, yeah. And at that moment, I updated my CV, reached out to a couple of friends, and I was gone within a month. I'd left the company because I could no longer say it's good here, and, you know, and I'd lost it, you know. So at that point, I took one of the biggest career-defining moments in my career, and leapt from pharmaceutical into medical devices, into orthopedics. And since then, I've never looked back. It was literally the best thing I've ever done. Going into an orthopedic company. To start off with, it was a little bit of a shock. I'd gone from quite a big, corporate factory into a unit, essentially in the middle of a field, just outside Cirencester. And to start with, I was thinking, oh my God, what have I done? But I soon learnt that, it was just an amazing company, and I will always have a soft spot for them. I don't know if I could say their name. Am I allowed to say their name?
Of course you can, yeah.
Corin.
You can swear.
Corin.
Yeah.
Do what you want, yeah, there's no rules here.
Corin in Cirencester. And, it was a small company. It's grown massively now. But it was a small company in Cirencester. My manager at that, when I went in, took a bit of a punt on me. I wasn't completely qualified for the role, but we had interviews and he kind of saw the potential in me. And I started there as a validation engineer and validated some key processes because the company was going through a PMA and they needed to address some things, and a lot of those were in validation. So I validated a plasma spray coating process, spraying titanium and hydroxyapatite onto orthopedic cups, which was amazing. I think I was the first person to do it. I think it was the first time the FDA had taken an interest in that particular process and the validation of it. And I worked with the company, which was on the Harwell ex-nuclear site, and we validated that process. And interestingly, a long, maybe about 6 or 7 years later, I was auditing a coating company for Corin, and I said, "Oh, can I see your process validation?" And they brought out, and it was like literally my words in this protocol, which was quite funny. But yeah, I brought into touch their sterility assurance, because my degree is a microbiologist. I'm a microbiologist by trade, I suppose. I sorted out a cleaning process and a reverse osmosis unit, and it was all really good. Again, sort of applying some engineering principles, solving problems and trying to bring compliance in, but maybe on a bit of a tighter budget, and having something to hang our hat on in each of these areas. I worked with the process engineering team, had a interesting boss. Again, I won't mention his name, but he'll know who he is, because he was like Lord Flashheart from Blackadder, and there was never a dull moment at Corin. You never quite knew what you were gonna come into one day to the next, and just such a good feeling, and it's quite hackneyed, but it had that real family feeling. And you saw people having absolute barneys at each other over, something that there was a disagreement, and then a couple of hours later, all forgotten, and just getting on. And that's really what I loved about Corin, and I will always have a soft spot for Corin. I spent I've tended to spend about 6 or 7 years at companies through my career, and I ended up at Corin as a regulatory affairs manager, and it was kind of a slow transition, but I started to work for the regulatory affairs director, and I was kind of feeding into the technical documentation and submissions, etc., in my areas. So it was the cleaning, the packaging, the sterilisation, the plasma spray coating, and those sorts of things. And I was feeding into that, and the role kind of sort of started to tip more from validation, although I kept responsibility for that. And more into the regulatory side. So I asked my manager, who was the regulatory affairs director, can I please change my job title to reflect more what I'm doing? And that was around the sort of time where, rather than kind of falling into a career path, I took an active decision, I want to do regulatory medical devices. So that was to go back, that was one of the most career-defining moments. Just that, a friend, an ex-colleague, phoning me up and saying, "Yeah, there's this job coming at Corin. I don't think you're completely qualified for it, but I think it's worth having a go." And I said, "Yep, I've just updated my CV," and I had an interview. I think it was even the next day. It was really quick, and I got offered that role within a week or so. So it was quite quick. And yeah, absolutely a career-defining moment. And like I say, I've never looked back since that time.
And just sort of jumping back to the comment that was made by a colleague around, I'm going to paraphrase it, this is shit. I imagine it's something along those lines. You were obviously feeling that for a while beforehand, and that couldn't have been easy to have been sat in that environment. Why did that one comment literally change the trajectory of your career?
It's just that moment that you realise, isn't it? That epiphany. I've been working very hard because it was change and everything was going wrong all the time. And that colleague who gave me the nod to that job at Corin, he said, "You've got a job more stressful than Tony Blair's," and it was probably true. Early on that week, I'd been caught by my manager at the time with a phone on each ear. I kid you not. I was on the phone to somebody talking and they had to go away, and then the other phone rang, so I put that on my ear and my boss came in and he just said, "What are you doing?" And you've only got one mouth. Yeah, I suppose that comment, it just precipitated the realisation that I don't have to stay here. This is just killing me. I'd had a cold for several weeks, wasn't really shaking it off, and I just realised how stressed I was and what a horrible environment it was for me. It wasn't suiting me anymore. And once you can't sort of like retort with the good, because everyone feels like this is shit sometimes, and normally you can snap out of it or something good happens later on. We all have a bad long day once in a while, but it was just I just couldn't go back to her and say, "No, Chris, it's fine. It's like, we're doing all this stuff and it'll get better in the end," and everything like this. And I just realised that I didn't really feel that way. And that's one bit of advice I'll give to anybody. As soon as you feel that way, just go.
And yeah, that was going to be my kind of next question. Are there any specific lessons?
I think it's, if you find yourself sitting around all day and moaning about a company and moaning about a job, just go. Just go. And that, I know that's easier said than done sometimes. I do appreciate that. But particularly at the minute, it's not a very good hiring environment. But make that decision and take steps to go, and go and do something, work somewhere where the culture might be better, or it's more attuned to what you like, or whatever. But never stick around in a company moaning about it. Just go.
Yeah.
It's and you do hear people even today, and they're moaning about the company and how bad this is and how bad that is. And I'm just thinking, obviously I don't tend to tell them this, but I'm just thinking, just go then. Just go. If this company isn't right for you, just go. But saying that, maybe I sound a little bit I don't know, but I do understand that it's sometimes not everybody can just go just like that, and particularly at the moment it's not that easy. But you can take the first steps. Yeah,
can't you? You can have conversations.
Yeah, exactly. You can update your CV. You can get on LinkedIn and start seeing what's happening, and things like that. Although LinkedIn didn't exist back when I computers.
Those are the conversations that we have every day. Those are the conversations that we're having every day now. Everyone is aware of current market conditions, whether that's contractors, it's people in permanent jobs, people looking to make that switch, and we have to manage expectations in those conversations. Everyone's situation is different, and our advice has to be tailored to the individual. But there are steps that they can be taking to manage their mental health, manage their physical health, things they're doing outside of work, and at least making forward steps to change, even if it's not going to be quick. Exactly. Which brings us on to how you manage your mental and physical health through maybe stressful times, whether that's in work, whether that's outside of work. And I guess the next section really does focus on you and any tools, whether consciously or subconsciously, that really help you manage. So from a mental health, emotional well-being perspective, is there anything that you would highlight that you do that is important?
Sleep. When you're stressed or feeling bad, then you might feel more inclined to, knock a beer or two back or whatever. For me, just make sure you sleep, and the hardest times are when you can't sleep, and we all know, I'm sure we've all had times when we can't sleep and the impact that has on you. For me, my mental health is greatly improved by, shall I say, getting somewhere with a lot of sky. So I live on the edge of the Marlborough Downs in Swindon, and I have a dog, a border collie, who needs a lot of walking, and I find that going up a hill and just looking at the countryside and walking, that's just amazing. I often have my headphones on. I quite like the music as well. I'm a bit of a muso, and a walk in the countryside, particularly up a hill.
The hill's the important part here.
Hill's the important thing. I always say somewhere with a lot of sky. I like walking through woods and things like that as well, but really for me it's going up hills. Particularly if there's a stone circle there. I do love a stone circle, okay. And those who know me will tell you that. I do love a stone circle, and I also have a very big interest in bats, and have taken part in many surveys and conservation efforts with my local council around bats, and handled them even. And I could tell you another story about rabies, a rabies inoculation I had to have, a rabies vaccine I had to have in a bit of an emergency. But getting out, that's the most important thing. And working from home, it's the days, these days I have a role where I'm not always at home, but for a lunch break, I get out, particularly in the winter where it's at the end of work, it's too dark to take the dog out. At lunchtime, a half-hour walk up a hill resets you. Absolutely, yeah. So that's how I handle my mental health. I sleep and I walk, but I think there's a lot to be said in trying to see the funny side. And sometimes in the most stressful situations, me and a colleague have been laughing, just about the absurdity of a situation. Not that we took any less, any fewer steps to resolve a problem or etc. like that, but I think sometimes just seeing the funny side and the absurdity when something's just gone so horribly wrong, and you laugh. And sometimes maybe people have been a little bit surprised at that when I've been laughing at a situation, but you just explain just how absurd the whole thing is, and you see it, and I never take myself too seriously either. That's another key thing.
You mentioned a colleague there. So you've got your internal systems of getting out, walking, you sleep. But who do you really lean on in times of stress? Is it a partner? Is it other family members, friends, colleagues?
Yeah, mostly it's my wife. Yeah, I think a lot of people would say that. You lean on them, and sometimes the truth hurts, but they're the ones. Your spouses are often the ones who are most honest with you, and sometimes you need that. You don't need somebody, trying to make you feel better. Sometimes you just need the truth, and my wife's very good at doing that.
Yeah. What was it like in your household through COVID?
Well, I think that we coped better than a lot of people did through COVID. I think that in a lot of ways, probably it might sound strange, but in a lot of ways I enjoyed it.
I loved it.
Yeah, it was
The first lockdown, loved it. The second one, I just wanted to get back into a gym. So yeah. Yeah. Well,
that was the one thing that the lockdown did for me. I used to go running a lot in a gym on the treadmill, and it was my routine. I would come on the way home from work. I would stop at the gym, go for at least a half-hour run, and then go for a sauna. So that's another thing that I love: are saunas and steam rooms. I've become addicted to them. I became addicted to them when I gave up smoking when I was 35. I took up steam rooms and saunas instead, and that was my kind of reward after the running. But then lockdown happened, all the gyms shut, and then after lockdown stopped, I never really got quite back into it. Obviously, there was a lot more home working then, and so in that way, it was kind of bad for me, I suppose. But I walk a lot now, and I don't run so much. I used to do the half marathons and things things like that, and got down to some quite good times. Yeah, walking I think is probably just as good for keeping you fit and healthy. But yeah, I used to look forward to the Friday night. Me and some mates used to have the Friday night pub quiz. I think a lot of people did that, and we would all do our rounds, and we were always finding new and interesting rounds to do. So that was good. I did a really good round once with fireworks. Probably shouldn't say this. It probably wasn't all that safe. But I did a round called Will It Fly, and strapped various objects to rockets and to see if they would take off. And if they didn't take off, it was quite good because they would explode on the ground. I was some way back, of course, and so were my children. But that was quite good because it wasn't your typical pub quiz. And I did one about the Taskmaster. Don't know if you ever watched that.
Yeah.
I did a Taskmaster round. It was quite good. But I used to love the Friday night quiz, and we'd have a few drinks, etc. But yeah, during lockdown, we were very lucky. My wife's a key worker, and I didn't get furloughed or laid off. I think if I remember rightly, we went down to 4 days a week, but we didn't. We were still meeting on the Friday night doing work. And I set up, at that time I didn't have my office down the bottom of the garden, but I set up a little corner. We've got a big summer house down the bottom of the garden, so I set up a little workstation in the corner there that would literally fold away, so you could still use the summer house. It's like a room it's like an extra room of the house, and it's got something in there for everyone: a sofa bed, big TV. Keep all my tools down there, and it's just it's like a hangout place for the kids more than anything. So it was important that my workstation folded away. But eventually I built my own office down here at the bottom of the garden. Keep on going about my office. Sorry.
Yeah. We kind of need a zoom out tour at the end of the episode.
Oh, I don't know about that.
You've talked about some of the tools, practices, habits. It sounds like you've got this clear break from work life and home life, and you can split the two. So have you got any advice for anyone else that would be going through their own turning point or challenge?
Well, I wouldn't say I've got any explicit advice, but if as soon as you can't say this is a good place to work and you're moaning, go. And I suppose try to do what you like and do it well. I've got no earth-shattering gems of wisdom there, but yourself, it's horrible doing something that you don't like to do, and I've always really appreciated the fact that I've been able to do mostly things that I liked doing, pottering about in engineering type things. And at Corin, I worked out one day that I worked one way or another with most of the elements in the periodic table, or certainly a lot of them. My chemistry was there as well, from nitric acid passivation process right through to cobalt 60 sterilisation processes, and all of the ceramics, etc., that you get in orthopedics. Just amazing. And I truly feel very privileged to have been able to do that, and not everyone can do it. Do what you like and do it well, or as well as you can. And I suppose as well, a bit of 80s wisdom, just be excellent to each other. That's what I always say, and you're nodding, you know what that film's from.
I don't.
It's Excellent Adventure. It's an 80s film, and it's a silly film, but actually that phrase is very sensible. Be excellent to each other. And I can't think of a more wise phrase to say.
So just thinking about the future, and we'll look at it in kind of two parts. Let's start personally. What is your future? What do you see for yourself?
That's a good question. I don't know. Who knows what's going to happen? You know yourself that I spent the summer unemployed. I got laid off at the beginning of April from a small startup company in software as a medical device, and spent the summer kind of reflecting, really, as well as looking for a job, of course. And you guys helped me out a lot there as well, and in fact you were one of the few agencies who kept in touch. Even if there was nothing going on, you kept in. Every now and again I'd just get a message and that was really appreciated. And in fact, all the agency people who did that, they're the ones that I'll be drawn to in the future, because I like the way that they handled the people, you know, and you're sure they've got a relationship with those people. But during the summer, you know, a lot even more dog walking, so the dog got double the amount of walk. And I could see on my iPhone my heart getting better and everything like this as the weeks went on. But I realised, you know, just how important and defining my job was to me. And I don't think everybody's like that, but you know, I'm the boring guy at a party who always goes on about his job. You know, when you can talk about poking things into people's brain and, you know, a cure for Parkinson's, or you're looking at a cure for Parkinson's, people are interested in that. So it's quite good. Yeah, I suppose I've got a role now at a lovely company, and I am going to say their name. It's called Ekin. They're a Northern Ireland company, 50 years old, doing ostomy products and respiratory products. And I've only been there a couple of months, but I'm really liking the culture and the people. I'm sure there's lots of stuff to do and improve, but the people they remind me of Corin, actually, and that's what drew me to the company, and made me work really hard to show them that I could do the role and that I was the right person for the role. But I mean, I can't see beyond that at the moment. You know, and maybe I'll stay at Ekin till I retire if they'll have me. I don't know, getting on a bit now. Yeah, I think, who knows? I can't really answer your question.
No,
still somewhat I take things as they come, and tend to land on my feet. I think, and I think I have landed on my feet with Ekin, and you know, this ostomy side of things as well. I have a daughter, because one of the things about lockdown, actually I probably should have mentioned it in that section, is that my daughter became type 1 diabetic at the beginning of it, and it was all tied up with it. In fact, they think that COVID might be one of these viruses that triggers those at a predisposition to diabetes. There's certainly a spike in juvenile diabetes at the beginning of lockdown. And you know, whilst it's not the same condition at all, people who have to wear an ostomy bag, you know, that's a life-changing condition, and it has to be managed, and it's the same as type 1. You know, it's a chronic condition, but if you can manage it well, and I mean, some of the medical devices now for type 1 diabetics, you know, the continuous blood glucose systems, you know, Dexcom and Libra, and now she wears a pump which talks to that. And whilst it's not quite an artificial pancreas yet, you know, she still has to bolus for meals. It makes her blood control much better. You know, it's the outcome is 97-98% in range and things like this. So, you know, that's good going forward in the long term. And you know, we always call it a big little problem. It's like a big thing, but because you manage it so well, it's a little thing. But sometimes it goes wrong, and you're just reminded how big it is actually, because it's not always plain sailing, and sometimes things do go wrong, and you're just reminded this is actually a big thing. But I kind of parallel that with, you know, somebody, you know, an ostomy, because it's a chronic condition, and with the right equipment and medical devices, you know, you can really make somebody's life better, and you know, make that chronic condition more manageable. And I take a lot from that. So going forward, I would like to be doing that same thing, whatever it might be. You know, just making somebody's chronic condition a little bit easier to manage. And I suppose the same could be said for at the beginning of my career in orthopaedics.
Yeah. And what excites you most about the future of the medical device industry?
Well, I still keep quite an interest in AI. There's a lot going on there, isn't there? And the regulators are trying to keep up and catch up. So I do find that quite interesting. I don't think I'll ever go back into software, don't get me wrong, but I still do keep an eye on, you know, that kind of SAMD space, and you know, a good friend of mine who I met, I hired him at Closed Loop Medicine. We're still in touch, and he's very much SAMD, and you probably know who I mean. And
Yeah.
we are in regular contact, and we still talk a lot about those sorts of things. So I do find that interesting, despite the fact that I'll probably never go back into it. But yeah, that's fascinating. What's happening with AI and the new? It's like, I suppose it's like 3D printing was like 10, 15 years ago. No one knows what the applications are fully yet, and some will take off and change lives, and others won't come to anything. And that applied to medical devices is what I find interesting. You know, finding that right application, and some of them will be game changing. You know, for our health systems particularly, if it's used right. So that I find interesting. Apart from that, you know, just the new materials that are coming out in medical devices. You know, some of, you know, amazing ceramics, and the application of ceramics. Again, that's having a bit of a resurgence in orthopedics, that ceramic aspect, particularly in hip resurfacing, which you didn't get ceramic hip resurfacing before, and now that's coming in, and that is good. So yeah, anything technical really excites me in medical devices.
Well, I can't believe we're at the end of the episode already.
No,
Thank
not
you,
quite. That's flown by.
It has, but thank you so much for sharing your story, insights, lessons, looking ahead to the future. It's been really, really interesting, and I'm sure lots of lessons for our listeners. So for our listeners, thank you very much for tuning in again. We've got plenty more guests lined up, and we'll be bringing, I guess, season 1 to an end shortly. We'll then do a review and then look ahead to future guests. So please like, share, subscribe across YouTube, Spotify and Apple, and we'll see you next time.
See you later. Thank you.